Nós estamos aqui com o professor Arne Westad. Ele é professor de História Internacional da London School of Economics and Political Science. Professor, it's a pleasure to receive you here.
It's great to be here.
O professor Westad está atualmente coeditando uma série de volumes da Cambridge History of the Cold War. E nós vamos falar um pouco sobre essa série e sobre o seu próximo livro, que é sobre a China e a ordem global. Professor, what were the main challenges in writing Cambridge History of the Cold War now?
Well, the main challenge is finding the right people to help you do it. I mean, that's always the biggest problem when you want to do something which is very comprehensive and covers a great period of historic time. You have to find the right people to actually help you write it. And this is a 3-volume work, 75 contributors from 18 different countries. And it was very difficult to figure out who they should be, because in a way you structure a project like this rather loosely to begin with, and then you have to start thinking about people who are going to do the individual chapters. So I would say that was the biggest challenge, to get a mix of people, more established scholars, younger scholars, people from different countries, people who use different methodologies, who have different kinds of insights and backgrounds and training to bring to bear on a very complicated subject. So that was the most difficult part of it.
And why no chapter in Latin America?
Well, we had a very difficult time with deciding what should go into it. Very much. Cambridge history is a product of the scholarship that is there. I mean, many people tend to think that a Cambridge history of anything, be it of English literature or of the Cold War, is really going to be comprehensive. It's going to be total in a certain way. It's going to cover everything that is there. That's not possible. You have to go with the scholarship that actually exists. You have to base yourself, you have to build on the scholarship that has already been carried out. And that was our main problem with Latin America. I mean, the scholarship on Latin America and the Cold War is rather weak. It's developing now, and it's developing very fast. But at the point when we started this, which is now almost 10 years ago, there wasn't really all that much to build on. So that's the first reason. Of course, there are chapters in the book on particular flashpoints with regard to Latin America and the Cold War, such as Central America in the late 1970s and the 1980s, for instance, or such as Cuba, which is fairly well covered in the book. But by the time we started, there wasn't really enough to build on to do, for instance, a chapter or even a set of chapters on the Southern Cone. So I think this is one of the problems with the field as such, which is reflected in the Cambridge history, that the history of Latin America and the Cold War, the history of Brazil and its involvement in the Cold War, is very underdeveloped as a research field.
So right now, how would you fit Brazil in the more structural dynamics of the Cold War after undertaking this major project?
Well, I think there are 2 ways of looking at Brazil's role with regard to the Cold War. I mean, one is to focus in on what is happening domestically within Brazil. I mean, over, to some extent, the whole span of the 20th century, going well beyond the period in the Second World War, where you had sort of a globalizing Cold War. And that's the dividing lines between the left and the right within Brazil itself. I mean, to some extent, you could see that as being a reflection, in ideological terms at least, of some of the tensions that went into the global Cold War as it played itself out in the late 20th century. And I think for researchers who are doing their work here, this is something that would be very useful to pursue, to look at how Cold War ideas, Cold War ideologies, Cold War concepts came to influence Brazil's own history, not least with regard to development and development plans and ideas and issues that were put forward with regard to that. And then secondly, of course, there is Brazil's direct involvement in international terms with what went on during the Cold War, which is more limited, but which is important, for instance, when you get to the 60s and 70s. We are just now at a conference I'm attending here discussing the 1961 to 1964 period, in terms of Brazil's own development and the impact that development had up to the 1964 coup elsewhere, such as in Chile or in Argentina, or even to some extent further north on the continent. And then the role that Brazil increasingly came to take as a more independent foreign policy player towards the end of the Cold War, which interests me a great deal. We talked, for instance, about the recognition of Angola in 1975, which had a major impact in Southern Africa, and I think many Brazilians do not quite understand how important it was in terms of what was going on in decolonization and Cold War terms in Africa, that Brazil chose to be the first country to outside Africa to recognize the new MPLA-led republic in Angola. So there are these kinds of sort of two-pronged attempts which I think need to be made to look at Brazil's role in the Cold War overall.